Anderson.
Second, Bailey.
All right, we got Anderson, Bailey, moving to approve the agenda. Any further discussion relative to the agenda? All those in favor of approving the agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. We have an adopted agenda. Do we have anybody from the public that wishes to address the Transportation Advisory Board on a matter of concern to them? It's not on the agenda
We didn't get any.
or otherwise, yeah. I don't see anybody coming forward. Chair reports, agency reports, next part of the agenda. For me, I'm going to hold off on talking about the work we did this morning at the Policy Working Group until Glenn and I get to the end on the informational session. But the TAB exec needed to do some housekeeping in terms of first and second vice chairs for 2025. Commissioner Gattel is going to be the first vice chair, and Victor Lake will be the second vice chair. And then the TAB liaison will be Peter Dugan. So I thank all of those folks for agreeing to serve on the TAB exec committee for 2025. And that will be it for me for a report for the time being. I guess I'm also heading to the U.S. Conference of Mayors Leadership Team meeting this weekend, and I'll be reporting out on some transportation issues that I'll get some information there that I'll bring back to you for the next meeting in terms of federal impact, which was a significant conversation in our policymaker working group. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Agency reports, Connie C. Ebdam's been with us all morning, and MnDOT, give you a chance to make your report from the agency.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just trying to make ourselves useful with the state government and MnDOT here. A couple of, I'll talk about safety a little bit, but I wanted to start my campaign of reminding folks that we're going to have some construction projects this coming summer. And actually, I heard that, and they are going to be on the Dunwoody, fixing all the Dunwoody bridges on 394, and the Dartmouth Bridge. For those who don't know who Dartmouth Bridge is, that's the I-94 bridge over the river. If you drive over that, you'll notice there's all kinds of patching work that needs to be done to protect the deck. And especially the 94 one, it's going to go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes for long periods, and which would create potentially congestions up to like an extra hour going through there. So we're working through working with the communities and to the road users for have a logical detours, and the best thing to do is to just avoid that area if you can help it. Locals, those who live there, should probably just use the local streets. Should not get on the freeway and allow the regional traffic to move a little bit easier. And
Which river?
Downtown Minneapolis, big one. So I'll be talking about that next month too again. But anyway, we're trying to do our best. We're working closely with Google because they have a lot to do with many here use Google app on their phones, and it'll send you through different routes, you know, if one is too busy. And actually on the 394 one, I met with the Bryn Mawr neighborhood, and they're worried about trucks going into, or cars going into city streets. For those who don't know the area, take detours. So we're trying to do what we can to take advantage of technology and whatever it takes to take care of the system and inform people. Safety related, this year so far, statewide, these numbers I'll talk to you is statewide, it's a lot less than the silver lining in the cloud is that it's a lot less than last year. So far, we've had 35 fatalities as of yesterday. Last year, this time, it was 48. So percentage-wise, if you look at it, last year total, we had 474. Again, these are statewide. So if we continue on this trajectory, extrapolate beyond the data, we would be about 345, which is less than one per day. I hate to talk about it that way, but it's almost becoming a habit that's a success to reduce fatalities to get to zero. A couple of points of interest, maybe 4 of them were vehicular fatalities, 4 pedestrian, 2 motorcycles, 1 bicycle, and 1 snowmobile that just happened on Valentine's Day. So anyway, related to safety, we will be releasing a draft plan for public comment on strategic highway safety plan. It's going to be in March for public comment. It was presented to this body last fall, if you may remember, and the Met Council has been involved shoulder to shoulder with us on that. And but let us know if you individually would like to know more about it, to be able to comment and understand better. Please let us know. We also have a MnDOT, an overall safety. It's called Safe System Implementation Plan, looking at the whole system as a whole and be more proactive in things. We talked earlier in some previous meetings about reactive versus proactive. There's a lot we can do with proactivity, with what we've learned with using technology and understanding what creates incidents, accidents, crashes, and things like that. So there will be a presentation on our Safe System Implementation Plan to this body, to the tab next month, March 19th. And the TAC will see the same presentation on April 2nd, from what I understand. Mr. Chair, if I may talk a little bit about the federal
Sure, please.
situation and how it may impact us or how it has. Basically, many of you are in tune with all of that. There's some uncertainties when a new administration comes in. The first reaction is to shut off the water tap completely and then slowly turn it back on, to the analogy that I could come up with, to let the water run for the things that meets their goals and vision. As you know, there's formula funds that comes back to the state, all our gas tax that goes to federal government, 18.4 cents a gallon. It comes back to the state, some of it through formula funds. And then there's also discretionary dollars that all states compete. And Minnesota has been very successful in that, and different types of programs had been identified by the Office of Secretary that we've been competing and have been fairly successful. Some of those there's been a halt to that. For example, the NEVI program, the electric vehicle program, the Federal Highway cannot take any more action on that until further notice. Some of the programs that we've had, like RAISE, I don't remember what it stands for, but it's big projects. They switched the name again back to BUILD. You may remember BUILD, and that's what the name was back in 2016 through 2020. And so to me, it's basically some of the same type of projects. The PROTECT program, which is the more resiliency, you can say, flood mitigation, all programs like that. The website's been down for that one, and the recent grants that have been awarded back in January here, I think it's under review, and who knows, 50-50 whether they continue on with those grants that have been signed. It's going to continue, and Federal Highway is working on that. I think, and as you know, the IIJA, the reauthorization, the program ends September of 2026, so we're about a year and a half away from that. And and it's anybody's guess how that'll be. My guess would be it'll probably be less money, but whatever. That's we'll have to see how that goes. But I think the key is for us to be smart about the funding and how to tap into the federal dollars. Again, like I said, we've been successful. Our visions with the state visions have lined up pretty well with previous administration. We just have to readjust. I'd call it the marketing plan for us as a state to repackage what and whether using different wording, the philosophies and what it does eventually for the communities. To me, it's the same. You just word things differently, and hopefully you can be successful and going and getting it. Having a short construction season, possibly delaying of funds coming down, hopefully we can manage all of that. So we work closely with our state legislators and management budget office. There was recently, about 2 weeks ago, there was a Washington briefing where all state DOTs were there, met with congressional delegations. We met with ours, and basically the message I'm getting from our Minnesota delegation that the focus will be safety, environmental streamlining, similar to before, and flexibility to the states, allow states to blend in better into a federal, under a federal umbrella to get their work done, which seems to be the message, sending more things down to the state level. And this is the same. Big bread and butter projects are going to continue, obviously, and the discretionary funds, like I said, it'll be probably in some different form, competition. There will be a lot of emphasis on innovation. We were just here talking with commissioners to my left and right about innovation, how we need to be more innovative and do think outside the box and do things that will get people's attention. U.S. Secretary Sean Duffy was there too, and he talked about his words that I wrote down. We're going to do more. We're going to do faster, bigger, and more beautiful projects. So that's one item to note. But his two main messages were safety and innovation. So being more innovative. Seemed to be a lot of emphasis on that and technology. So with that, I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for that update, particularly on the federal side. I can say that what I've heard so far coming out of Washington and out of our staff at U.S. Conference of Mayors is that those discretionary funds on the IIJA, if cities have or counties have, units of government have executed contracts on grants, they're in good shape because it's a contractual obligation. If you have a grant but no contract, those things are all going to get pulled back. So, and then what's at most risk in the scheme of things is transit. It's going to be an emphasis on road infrastructure, bridge infrastructure, transit most at risk. So we've got to work some strategies to make sure that transit funding is protected. Let me turn now to Frank Kolash, who we're pleased to have with us, our colleague, member of the MPCA staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see everyone today. Again, my name is Frank Kolash. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Air and Climate Policy with the Pollution Control Agency. And just a few updates from the environmental side of the world. One, we are tracking what the new U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary had issued in a letter to have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration review and reconsider the fuel economy standards for the corporate average fuel economy for the country. We think that that is likely to weaken the fuel economy standards for the country's vehicles from model year 2027, which starts in calendar year of 2026, through model year 2031. And so we anticipate seeing what they will happen on that, but it's fully anticipated that in compliance with executive orders that were signed on January 21st, that those will be reduced and made less stringent. We are also tracking, EPA has not yet come in and made their proposals around the California waivers for the Clean Air Act waivers for more stringent vehicle emission standards, but we anticipate that will fully happen in due time as we work with our federal partners. We have just received a word that, or our verification, that our federal funds have finally all been released from a pause. We were waiting on a pause. The remaining funds we had until yesterday afternoon were all Inflation Reduction Act grants that EPA was paused with. We are participating in multi-state litigation, particularly participating in the Rhode Island litigation about ensuring that the federal government as a whole is complying with the judge's order that came out about the inability of the federal government to pause those funds in compliance with an executive order, particularly focused on the separation of powers of the administration's ability to fail to provide funding that's already been duly authorized by Congress. To the chair's point, though, it is very clear that when a signed agreement and work plan exists, that is a stronger position for all of our grants. If there has been no work plan agreed to, agreement signed, it is much easier for the federal government to pull those funding back. But what that has meant is that we have not had until today access to our electric school bus grant through the Inflation Reduction Act that would provide 19 school buses, electric school buses to Minnesota. We have 2 climate pollution reduction grants. One's a planning grant, one's a $200 million implementation grant. The planning grant does include our ability to support the Climate Action Framework update, which we have a transportation chapter that MnDOT is leading on developing that, so we can set the charter for the state on climate action for the coming years and meeting our statutory goals of emission reductions. The implementation grant includes funding that would come through the Pollution Control Agency for replacement of heavy-duty diesel vehicles with electric vehicles, particularly in the food system network. So vehicles that are transporting food commodities or finished food products would be eligible for the replacement of diesel vehicles with cleaner burning fuel vehicles, and then also the replacement of vehicles that are used in the agricultural system and equipment from diesel to cleaner technologies, primarily electric, but also opportunities for hydrogen or ammonia as a clean fuel as well. And then we have a couple of other grants on air monitoring that we have finally received clearance on from the pause. But again, we continue to work across the administration, across the climate subcabinet to ensure that these funds are available to bring benefits to Minnesotans. These are not just about getting agency funding. This is about the benefits that can come to Minnesotans, growing jobs, improving the environment, improving access to funds for climate-smart agricultural practices, for peatland restoration, for vehicle replacement, for industrial innovation moving forward. On more positive news, the administration continues to work forward on a sustainable aviation fuel task force that the Pollution Control Agency and the Environmental Quality Board are leading. This is to really focus on the 3 R's that state government has to play with regards to sustainable aviation fuel. That's recruiting sustainable aviation fuel production in Minnesota, doing whatever necessary environmental review is required for the full life cycle of the production, and then making sure that these are regulated in a way that protects the environment, protects water quality, air quality, soil health, water quantity, groundwater quality, groundwater quantity, as we see that this is a priority at the state level and at in the private and nonprofit level as well, to move forward to be able to seek the production of sustainable aviation fuel in Minnesota from multiple feedstocks where it makes sense in multiple parts of the state. We also have a similar task force that we are working on with extreme heat and air quality, being prepared for the summer when we know that people will be working outside, particularly focused on not just children, but men and ages 15 through 34 at the highest risk of suffering from extreme heat during the working season because they tend to be outside working, but focusing on people who are outside quite a bit and understanding that under the current situations based on the federal actions, that there may be fewer people available to be working outside. And so that may mean fewer people have to do the same amount of work or more amount of work. And if we are having extreme heat events, that they know how that they can protect themselves, and that employers also know that they have responsibilities to provide protections for people that are working in extreme heat situations. Then I also want to announce that tomorrow we will be holding the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change meeting at the MPCA St. Paul offices from 10 a.m. to noon. We will be focused on a review of the greenhouse gas emissions report for the state that the Pollution Control Agency and the Department of Commerce put together, and then looking at modeling that has been produced by Fresh Energy for greenhouse gas emissions in the residential and commercial sector. And then talking about the opportunities and the challenges for federal funding. Minnesota has been very active, and as we heard at a climate subcabinet meeting in January, there's a lot of money that we feel like we have locked up from the federal government through the Inflation Reduction Act and through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And how are we going to make sure we bring that to Minnesota so that Minnesotans get that benefit? And then my final item is that I did my best to play the role of Chair Hovland, and I did pass along the certificate of appreciation to Todd Bewan at his retirement party, and he was very happy about that. So thank you again for that, and he expresses his wishes for, and thanks for all the good work that you are doing here.
Yeah, thanks, Member Kolak. Could you get that report on the greenhouse gas reduction to Elaine, or give her a link to it so that we could have that redistributed to all the members of the tab? I think it would be important for all of us to have it.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for that. Any questions for Member Kolak? All right. Well, Carl, it's great to have you back.
Yes.
We're not letting you go to Nebraska anymore.
I'm not going to Omaha anymore.
No.
I don't think they want me there.
That's where he had his mishap several months ago, and it looks like you're recovering well. We're so pleased to have you back.
Appreciate it.
And Bridget did a good job. I see she's here today, making sure that everything goes fine.
Well, since I've been out of commission for quite a while, I would defer to Bridget if she wanted to make some comments to the panel. I have a few panel comments, but
Sure. Well, maybe you'd want to make
Bridget.
Maybe you'd want to make yours first, and then she can cover anything that you don't cover.
Well, we had a report yesterday from TSA, and they have full complement of employees here at the airport. So that's one good thing. Even though you've all heard the FAA has laid off 300 employees. And then we had that airplane crash from Delta Airlines in Toronto.
Yeah.
And we still haven't received a definitive report of what happened. But we're glad that everybody's lived, and there's been some injuries, but nobody's lost their life. But last year, in '24, we had 37.2 million passengers pass through. It's a 9% increase over '23. We had 342,000 operations at the airport. And just out of curiosity, just to let you know, 40% of all passengers leave the airport before 9 a.m.
Oh.
So if you're planning on leaving, you either got to get there at 2 o'clock in the morning or come after 9 o'clock. But 40% leave early. I think they always feel there's less airplane cancellations if they leave early. Plus, I'm sure they want to get where they're going at an early time also. T2 had an increase in operations over '23. And then the reliever airports, Air Lake, Lake Elmo, St. Paul, and Anoka had an increase over 2023 in operations. But Crystal and Flying Cloud had a decrease for whatever reason. And usually Flying Cloud is a pretty busy airport, but it had a decrease this year. And then we had a reward, we received another award from ACI North America for marketing, excellence in marketing. So that was presented to us yesterday. And then I would defer to Bridget now if she wants to talk about federal funding, or I'm sure she has more detailed
I
information.
was going to jokingly ask you if you'd gotten any awards yet this month, and here you are, reporting out on yet another award to our airport.
Yes.
So thanks for that good work. Bridget, welcome. Bridget
Thank
Reef.
you, Mr. Chair, members, Member Crimmins, you did it.
Pull that microphone up just a little bit for yourself, too, will you?
There. Is that better? All right.
A little bit better, I think.
So just a quick comment with regard to federal funding. We are self-funded at the Airports Commission, but we do receive federal grants for some of our construction projects. The FAA reauthorization did take place before the end of 2024, but the appropriation did not. And so the typical grants that we would see this year are currently awaiting appropriation. We're not anticipating and wouldn't normally anticipate any of those grants to come through until April or so anyway. So some of them are at risk, some of them are not. Most of our funds, especially our IJJ, whatever the acronym is, have been obligated. We've been spending down our federal funds in those programs ever since 2022. So we're sitting in good position overall from an airport's perspective with regard to our federal funding. Our federal partners, as was noted, losing staff, which is problematic. But we will endure.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that report out on a federal basis. Any questions for Bridget Reef or Member Crimmins? Yeah, other comment?
Mr. Chair, may I add just one more thing for anyone who may be traveling in an early morning during spring break. MSP does have a program now called MSP Reserve. It is free of charge. You can reserve a spot in your security line at both terminals, T1 or T2. I would highly recommend that you do that, in particular if you're flying out in the mornings. Works really slick. You get a time slot, and then you go through the first class line. So.
Oh, interesting. You can reserve a spot in the security line.
You can reserve a spot in the security line.
Regardless of your status?
I'm sorry?
Regardless of your status, or?
Regardless of your status, yes.
So
Did it
even-
last
Sign
year
up.
super slick. You pass everybody in line with your little piece of paper. And
They'll be glowering at you? All right, thanks for that. All right. Deb Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pretty sure today, just want to let everybody know that we did approve the Regional Development Guide, which is Imagine 2050, on February 12th. That also included some of the system plans, some of which were involved here, including the Transportation Policy Plan, but also the Water Policy Plan, the Regional Parks and Trail Plan, the Housing Policy Plan, and the Land Use Plan. So now it'll be a lot of coming out to communities and talking to people what it means, what it doesn't mean, working with communities of how we implement everything. But it's really the kickoff now for a lot of the local entities as they start looking towards their next round of comprehensive plans. So things like system statements will start coming up this fall. And so that whole cycle kind of starts all over. But just want to let, first of all, thank everyone who's commented or been involved with any of the policy plans along the way. We appreciated all the comments, tried to work as many as we could in. We can't make everyone happy, but we try to accommodate as many scenarios as possible. But if you need resources to come out to your communities to talk about sort of the next steps and what comp plans might look like and all of that, just let us know. Like, we're willing as council members. We also have staff members who are very engaged. And I came on council just after this happened last time, so about 10 years ago. And I can tell you it was really nice to be able to take local experts out to some of the communities of how can we do this, how can we help, what resources does council have. So please reach out with any questions, concerns, or requests. And then the other one is just wanted to announce, and I'll bring it up next time too, but the Gold Line service begins on March 22nd. So thank you all for the support of this project. It's very important for the east side, and we're really excited to see that kick off.
Thank you, Member Barber. Any questions for Member Barber? All right, I'm going to turn to Gary Hansen now for Suburban Transit Authority report out. Member
Thank you, Mr.
Hansen.
Chair. Maple Grove Transit and Plymouth Metrolink expect the draft reports on their joint transit needs assessment study will be ready in April. They're particularly interested in seeing how and where their microtransit programs can work together. Minnesota Valley Transit Authority's Connect Microtransit service continues to set daily ridership records since the service was expanded to Shakopee and Prior Lake. MBTA will break ground in March on It's Burnsville Bus Garage Modernization Project, which will include construction of a new maintenance area, office space, driver training area, and other much-needed improvements. And construction is expected to be completed early next year. Southwest Transit reported a 9% increase in ridership over the prior year. Southwest's 494 fixed route service to the Mall of America and the airport is expected to launch at the end of next month. That's my report.
Very good. Questions for Member Hanson? All right, very good. Joe McPherson, our TAC Chair, anything to report out from a TAC standpoint? Mr. Chair?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Nothing really to report other than the consent and non-consent business items. We also heard from the Regional Solicitation Evaluation Group that's working on that. We're going to hear from them later today, so I'll add comments at that time.
Okay. All right, stand by. We'll have you back up momentarily. We've got minutes from January 15, 2025. May have a change. Let me ask, any changes or additions first?
No, I have a.
And do we have a motion then? Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, now, discussion.
This isn't about this. I didn't get my hand up sooner. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a general question. And it came from Connie's your share out. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. Projects that are funded but not contracted are at highest risk of having their federal funding pulled. And the highest at-risk projects are transit projects. Is that?
That's the rumor I'm hearing so far, is that highest risk projects, funding is that related to transit.
Yeah.
And that if you have projects that were approved for grants where the contract is in place, you're in good shape.
Okay.
If you have contracts that involve grants that don't have a contract in place yet, they're at risk.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Okay, so is there a report of projects that are funded but not contracted? And is the council or staff working with those project managers to move faster and get those contracts in? Or can we get that?
Staff of the Met Council, you mean, or just generally?
Yeah, I don't know who would hold that or who could pull that. If it's the council or if it's.
I don't think it matters now. If you don't have an executed contract by both parties, you're at risk even though you have a grant. If there's no contract in place supporting the grant award, it's at risk. But so it doesn't matter if they're going to try to hurry up and get the contract in and signed on a one-party basis. The government isn't signing the contract. Does that make sense? Or did I answer your question?
So you did. I would just,
Sure.
I would just strongly encourage that we do not just sort of throw our hands up in the air and say that it is done. If you don't have a contract, we don't know what's going to happen. I think it's in the interest of everybody at this table that we get those contracts in place as soon as possible, just so that we can say this is a priority for the council and for the body, so we can move on those contracts.
All right, now we'll turn to, as it relates to us locally, we'll turn to Deb Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really, the information that we've been getting is generally that awarded funds and grants are moving, but anything new is definitely on hold.
Hold that microphone a little bit closer.
So we are assuming that when it comes to the things that won't happen, it likely falls under new CIG. So it's infrastructure. It's the transit infrastructure where they're matching federal components. That is the area that is most at risk. So we have formula funds that come through for help us with purchasing of new buses and some of that. But most of the infrastructure, if you look at ABRTs and even the operations, you look at the sales tax, are managed locally. So there are two very different, distinct things.
Okay.
Member Foster, any follow-on? Yeah, so the comment I was making too is with respect to discretionary grants.
Right.
Not with respect to formula funding.
Correct.
Which comes in a different way. So now we've still got minutes to deal with. All in favor of approving the minutes of January 15th, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Those minutes are adopted. And I'll go back to you though, Member Foster. You still have a point you want to make here. That we're happy to have the discussion. It's important.
I appreciate that. I think I made my point. I think the more detailed questions that I have, I will follow up with Member Barber.
Okay.
About like, to get a clearer understanding of what is happening.
And we'll be working hard this weekend on strategies at the U.S. Conference of Mayors Leadership Team meeting around making sure that funding for transit isn't diminished.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. You think about 90% plus 90+% of the U.S. economy occurring in cities, the top 100 cities driving the economy. You better have an effective transit system in place to make sure that the economy is working as well as it can. So that's, to me, is a fact that we need to really drive home.
I can't nod my head faster.
All right. So let's now go back to, we've got a couple of consent agenda items, and Chair McPherson's going to come up and explain those, and then we're going to roll into the non-consent portion of the agenda. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. So we've got two consent agenda items. The first one is 2025-08, streamlined tip amendment to the 2025 to 2028 tip. MnDOT would like to add the evaluation, some additional consultant services to evaluate dual left and right turn lanes as it applies to Canterbury Road, adjacent to Trunk Highway 169 down in Shakopee. So this one does not impact the regional solicitation funds. This is through MnDOT's programs.
Any questions on that? All right. Go ahead and handle the next one.
Sure. The second one here is 2025-09. Again, another streamlined tip amendment. MnDOT is increasing one of their projects related to modifications to an auxiliary lane, bridge repair, retaining walls, you name it. There's a whole bunch of stuff included along I-394. And as part of the project, as the MnDOT was working with their maintenance crews to ensure that the modifications to the auxiliary lane were done to provide for a safe working space for their staff, they are widening out that auxiliary lane. They're relocating a retaining wall, which it's a domino effect. All of a sudden you start impacting other features such as the retaining wall on the frontage road, Wayzata Boulevard, water main, and a few other things. So as you'll note in your action item, the cost of that project is increasing from approximately $8 million up to $15 million. Again, this project is funded through MnDOT's programs and does not impact the regional solicitation.
Okay. Any questions on 09?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My comment is more just on the verbiage in the action transmittal. Under background and purpose in the second paragraph, it ends with, this added scope is largely...
Jenkins, are you on 09 or 08?
Oh, I'm sorry, 09.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this added scope is largely responsible for the cost increase. And then 2 pages later, under background and tip amendment needed, there is not any change in project scope. So that's unclear to say that there's no scope change, but there is. And I support the request. I'm just wondering if we can get this updated for the approval.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, member, I think we can do that. I think the scope of the project, if I understand it correctly, the scope didn't change. It's just as they're going through the design process and they start implementing what the scope of the project was, it starts to push out the limits of that construction project. But I can turn it over to a MnDOT rep if they want to talk about that.
Well, I agree. It's all the wording, but the scope itself has not changed. But you can say this basically became a safety problem. We're making it safer for our workers, the maintenance workers, for police to pull people over, whatever it might be, for the emergency on the side. So that's the main scope is still the same, but it's safer. It's a safety project without having the word safety in it. So.
To the point that you raised, Member Jenkins, I think the recommended motion language is still,
right.
That'll still work for us. So would you care to move 08 and 09 as a single motion?
So moved.
Right.
Jenkins.
We have a second?
Second.
All right, Martinson, seconds. Motion and second to adopt 2508 and 09 in a single motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 08 and 09 are adopted. Now we're on to the non-consent portion of the agenda. And first matter there is 05, 250505.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this first one is adoption of adjusted infrastructure federal performance measures as it relates to MnDOT's improvement program. So if you look in the packet there, what's being proposed is a reduction in the target for both the non-interstate national highway system pavement target for there's good, fair, and poor categories. And so this is a reduction of the number of roadways that would be classified in that good category from 55 down to 40%. And that's reflective of MnDOT's programming, where they're gonna apply their funds, looking at the projects that were recently completed and the condition of those roadways, just more accurately displaying and depicting what's going on in the real world. Similarly with the bridge performance targets, they're reducing it from 35% on the good down to 20%, all staying the same. I do wanna highlight in both of those performance target categories, they're not reducing or increasing the number of acceptable poor category infrastructure items. So whether it's a pavement, if you look at the categories there, on the pavement side, they're accepting 2% or less on the poor category. So they're still maintaining that investment to try and keep those facilities up. Similarly, in the bridge program, if I have it correctly, looking at my notes, the minimum or the poor condition was 5% or less. That is not changing. So this is just applying their resources where necessary to maintain the fair category bridges and pavements. So,
Questions for the chair on this matter? Member Martinson?
So is it correct that the scale that's used only has 3 categories to it? It's just good, fair, or poor?
correct.
So that's very interesting because those categories are more typically seen in a 5-point Likert scale that is used throughout all kinds of areas of research, where you have a scale that runs from poor to fair to good to very good to excellent. So it's fascinating to me that our roadway infrastructure is they've truncated the scale so they're only using the lower portion of that more typically seen scale, which I didn't appreciate at the Monday meeting than when we had the informational meeting. So that's very interesting to me. It means that we're not even maintaining any of our infrastructure at a very good or at an excellent level. So it means we've got more infrastructure than we can maintain. So just an observation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Member Martinson. Member Jenkins?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on that, because in my research, bridges are judged on the NBI, National Bridge Inventory Scale, which is 10 points. And then the IRI for road surfaces is, I think, 5, very good, good, acceptable. But we're not using either of those. We're using something else?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I can turn that over to MnDOT if they'd like to respond on what those categories are.
This is the bridge engineer over here, right? We'll find out from him.
I'm going to defer to my planning programming director, Molly McCartney.
Thank you, Chair and members. So the performance measures are related to federal performance measures, and it really has to do with how we report back to the federal government, the federal highways. It does not have really anything to do with like the structural analysis that we're doing every year with our inspections and how the NBI, you did the national, the bridge rating that we do for our own modeling and programming. So it's not NBI rating.
Okay.
Performance measures, we are allowed to adjust this over time so that our targets reflect the current condition, and that has things to do with compliance. And so the Metropolitan Council is adopting what MnDOT's already adopted.
Okay. So just
Yes, go,
follow-up
Member Jenkins.
comment on that is similar to the last thing I commented on. I'm concerned again about the wording of the action transmittal, because if someone comes and looks this up a year or two from now, they're not going to realize that, oh, we changed the top score. All they see in this action transmittal is good or bad. There's no mention, there's no acknowledgement that there's a fair or potentially other levels. And I just wanted on the record that just because we're dropping good and bad didn't improve, it's not like those points just went off into the ether. It just didn't seem clear to the public that we're not letting the roads all go to bad. So I wanted better communication of that point.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think that's fair. That's a fair comment. At TAC, we had a similar discussion about, what are these points? You got good, fair, and poor. We wanted to ensure that same comment, that we're not just letting things lapse, letting things get into worse conditions. So, fair comment.
And I think, Member Seabram, you had a comment at tab exec about poor, the definition of poor relative to MnDOT, and it's bridges. We don't have any in poor condition, because if they were poor conditions, I recall your comment, they wouldn't be operational.
Right. We don't have any unsafe bridges. That word's pretty serious. We take that seriously. Yeah. We may have bridges in poor condition with only up to, 5% you said? And, but no more than that. So as a state, I think we do pretty well compared to the rest of the country. Unfortunately, we had a disaster back in '07, but so anyway. Yeah, if it's unsafe, it wouldn't be on the system.
That was an interesting distinction you made there for me, that we don't have any bridges that are unsafe. We got some that are in poor condition.
Right, we inspect them every year, and especially after the bridge collapse, they have definite items they need to take care of immediately, so, yeah.
Thank you. All right, is there a motion relative to 05?
So moved. Go TAC.
Second, Anderson.
All right, we've got a motion and second with respect to adoption of action transmittal 2025-05, which adjusts those performance measure targets based on some federal requirements. Any further discussion? For adoption of action transmittal 2025-05 in its recommended motion form, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 2505 in its recommended form is adopted. And then we are on to 2025-06. Chair McPherson.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this next one is a program year extension from the City of Columbia Heights on an HSIP project that they received funding for. It's along Central Avenue, better known as Trunk Highway 65, which runs north and south through their city. That corridor has been fraught with a lot of pedestrian and bicyclist safety issues over the years. And with that, it was a high-scoring application. The intent here and the reason for the request for program year extension or project year extension is because they're coupling that with a project that MnDOT is currently working on to enhance that whole corridor. Not just get to the specific issues with the peds and bikes, but all modes of transportation on that, including Metro Transit's F-line, which is a future ABRT. So with that being said, this is to align these projects in the same program year. It did come up, there were some great comments that came up from the public here and some representatives regarding, okay, so if we're gonna push back these improvements 3 years, because it's going from 25 to 28, what's gonna be done in the interim? And what can be done to ensure that there's still a safe area for that to move forward with? That is something that I feel we need to follow up with the city on. I'm not sure if we have a city rep. We actually do. Yeah. We have Kevin Hansen, the city engineer here. I'm happy to provide him an opportunity to maybe speak on behalf of that.
Thank you. Yeah, you might as well begin the walk up here to the microphone because Member Vaughn wants to raise an issue that he raised at the TAB Exec Committee meeting, which I think is an important issue about how do we enhance safety in the interim period if we approve this extension. So Member Vaughn, you want to posit your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you for your work. I would be happy to hear you maybe flesh out a little bit more about if we're pushing back for the synchronization benefits, pushing back to 2028, which I see the benefit of that. I'm excited about some of those changes that are coming, but then thinking about vulnerable road users, the higher safety risks and fatalities and injuries that have been seen on that corridor, kind of what Columbia Heights is thinking about in the interim in those 3 years to meet the needs of those users. Thank you.
Certainly.
Would you first identify yourself too?
Certainly. Kevin Hansen, I'm the Director of Public Works and City Engineer for Columbia Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen.
So if I understand the question correctly, what are we going to do in the interim up until it's actually constructed? So there are really three things I think that we're focusing on. One of them happens to be MnDOT. So MnDOT last year went out and implemented some interim measures just in terms of demonstration. And those were focused on pedestrian crossings. So what they did is they moved the medians out to give safe haven. And again, this is all done on a temporary basis. Those were done with foldable demarcators that are out in the median. And they also extended out where the crosswalks are, just to shorten the crossing distance. And that was really done as a demonstration project, but those are still in place, and it's intended that those will be left in place until such time that it's constructed. I think TAC Chair McPherson had indicated that there's been a lot of work being done on this corridor. And that work began with the Pell study, phases 1 and 2, about 3.5 years ago. There's been a lot of PR, a lot of public campaign out there. That will continue as we move from the site layout phase into the design phase. MnDOT is currently working on that. And there's been really heavy public engagement with that. And we've had really good turnout with that. So keeping it out in front of our public in terms of the safety of the corridor. And I think the third thing and the last thing, recognizing the safety component and the issues that we've had out there with pedestrians is this is a focus area for our police department. So they do their own monitoring out there, they do speed trailering out there, and they're really doing a lot of enforcement as it relates to speed. Trunk Highway 65 is a main north-south corridor in Columbia Heights, so it goes from both ends of our city, the north and south end, but there are speed limit changes out there. So that's one of the things that our police department has really started doing more enforcement out in this corridor just to really keep that in place in the interim time. But I think really keeping this out in front of our community, out in front of the public, getting the messaging out there and working with our police department just to ensure safe motoring speeds out there until we get the really reconstructed Trunk Highway 65 complete. Mr. Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Vaughn, any follow-on? Yeah, Glenn, go ahead. Member Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this came up at the info session that we had yesterday. I want to say Monday, but it was yesterday. Again, I echo all these concerns about it's a safety project, so pushing it back 3 years means 3 more years of serious injuries and death that are happening on a corridor. So I think we should just acknowledge that that's something that's happening with this. I certainly do agree with we should always be synchronizing projects as much as possible. It saves a bunch of money. It makes it a lot easier for people that are going through the corridor to not have construction for 3 different projects staggered out over a decade plus. But I did want to note, at least for this one, and again, I think there's a question at the end, and I'm not sure who can answer it, but just that this is all, again, because of funding from MnDOT, that all these projects are being pushed back in this case. And this is kind of getting to that big mega project topic we've talked about before. We're going to talk about that with the policy change here in just a moment. But just sort of acknowledging that we never move these forward. It's the thing in order to sync them up is usually we move it back to sort of the one thing that can't move, and that usually is a funding question. And so I think my question behind that, though, is, if some other funding source is found, if the state legislature decides to give MnDOT more money to fund this program, are we going to be back here again doing a let's change the program year and move it up? Sort of what happens in these circumstances with moving things back? Is there any possibility of moving these forward if money is the only issue?
Maybe I could, yeah. Go ahead, you want to take a stab at it?
Elaine has a comment.
With our projects, at any time, a entity can advance construct their project, and if there is funding available, they would be reimbursed that year. Otherwise, they would wait till the year the funding is available. So if those projects move up a year, they could construct a year early. They would still wait for that 3 year where we moved the money, but they can advance construct at any time.
Okay, I knew Elaine would have the answer, so thank you for that. Yeah, I just want to make sure that it wasn't going to be an issue that we would have to come back and do another program year change again. So it sounds like there's still a mechanism, so thank you for the answer.
Okay, good. Mr. Hanson, from talking to your mayor, I think you're all pretty excited about this project and the possibility of working with MnDOT and having a little bit of road shrinkage because of the project and enhancing safety in the process.
So, Mr. Chair, indeed, that has been a focus of the city. This is the HSIP for 2025 is actually a second project for us. So we initially did enhancements, lighting and sidewalk enhancements in 2016. And again, you had mentioned, Member Johnson had indicated it's a matter of funding, and it's a matter of funding for us too. So that was a second part for us to get lighting on this entire corridor. I think from our city council, we certainly appreciate that, your consideration of this, and safety is the number one priority, exactly. Our mayor and city council are very excited about this from a safety perspective and also from a pedestrian perspective on what is really a busy corridor in Columbia Heights.
All right, good. Thanks for that. Any additional questions from TAB members? Comments? All right, very good. Do we have a motion to approve 2025-06?
So moved, Jepson.
Second. Second, Member Lake. All right, we've got a motion and a second on 2025-06. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of 2025-06 in its recommended form, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 2025-06 is adopted in its recommended form. Thank you. Back to Chair McPherson, 2025-07.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one is a program year extension request with a little icing on the cake here. So Minneapolis Whittier Neighborhood Safety Improvement Project. So this is a project to make some improvements, pedestrian improvements. So pushing a project back 1 year, but also it's a safe routes to school project and coupling with another safe routes to school project. One of the projects is actually getting moved ahead. So it's kind of answering Member Johnson's question. This is an example of part of the funding is moving back, part of it's moving forward to align the two projects together. So,
Questions on this one for the chair? Is there a motion to adopt excuse me.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm going to move it for
Member
approval.
Chaudhary, yeah, you go ahead. You have a comment too, or you want?
I just appreciate the support for this. In addition to the Safe Routes to School program for Whittier International School, this will be supporting ADA and ramp upgrade improvements for 11 different intersections. So it's a big deal for this neighborhood. So just appreciate the support for this item. I think it's going to make a lot of parents and families very happy in the area.
Yeah, well, thanks for that additional information. It's nice to have. So Member Chaudhary moved 2025-07. Do we have a seconder?
Second, Gotel.
All right, we got a motion and a second on 2025-07. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of 2025-07 in its recommended form, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 2025-07 is approved, adopted. And now we are at 2024-40, which is something that staff has been working on for quite a while, is this scope change policy. And this is something we've worked on over the years, and it seems like there's always some factual circumstance that creates another look at the policy, and constantly sort of musing about how do we create a policy that effectively works. So this is the latest piece of good work from staff, and I'll let Chair McPherson walk us through it.
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and compliments to staff and everyone that worked on both of these next items. We got the scope change and then the program year extension policy here. So we'll start with action item 2024-40. Again, that just signifies this is something that came up last year and was discussed. I believe it was August or September last year. Both TAB and TAC had comments. It went back to the working groups. They've since looked at it again and come up with some recommendations and changes that are before you today. And so I'm just going to try and hit the high points. If you guys have any questions, feel free to chime in. But staff has done a nice job of bullet pointing this for me. So first, with the scope change here. So over time, several scope changes requests have been submitted when elements of the project are being completed with another project. We've seen some of them recently where either elements of the project just make more sense being done with a local project or some other project that's already programmed. So it makes sense to do that scope change. These changes have been coming through as formal scope changes. The policy change, this policy change, which is written in there, allows for this type of scope change to be approved. The current policy does not address that within it. The policy change adds this type of scope change to the list of informal scope changes if the value of the element is less than 10% of the awarded amount, up to $500,000. So if you think about that, depending on the value of the project, if it's not going over that 10% threshold or a maximum of $500,000, it could be handled as an informal scope change, which helps speed the project along. Looking at the past several years, there were 12 projects in the past 9 years of this type. 7 would have been approved informally and 5 would have been retained as a formal scope change policy. So just more efficiency with that. Any questions on that aspect of the recommended changes? All right. The second side, for all informal scope changes, that cost reductions are not addressed, this policy change and update allows the scope change to remain an informal scope change if the cost reduction is less than $100,000. So it's a rare occurrence, but the basis for the inclusion of this is that when a voluntary reduction of funds comes along with a modification, rather than go through the process, MnDOT, Met Council staff were able to simply remove the funding, and then the selected amount was deemed as a reasonable amount to reduce at a staff level, since the reductions are automatic with lower costs of improvements completed. So this is added language in that policy. Any questions on that part of it? So two different things there. One is the stuff that's still getting completed. This one is actually the scope change. Okay. The last one here I want to focus on is, so for all projects where an element is removed, it is a formal scope change. This change would allow any funding reduction determined to be less than $50,000. The funding would remain with the project and change approved by the grant manager and staff, more of an informal process. In the last 9 years, 9 projects had elements removed and TAB approved to keep the funding in small amounts. 7 changes range from $9,600 to $40,000 and would be administratively approved in the future. 2 were $63,000 and $64,000 and still would go through the formal approval process. So again, just for efficiency on this, when you look at these small changes, these small scope changes, if the dollar value is below that 50,000, it could be handled in that more informal process. So it's just streamlining the process, gives TAB some direction on how to handle these, since we've been seeing more of them come through. With that, I'll just open it up to questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Question, yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice work, Mr. Chair, there of TAC. I was just, a general comment, this comment applies not only to this approval, but the next. We both sent them back for more work by largely your committee and staff. And I feel really good that when we send something back, the input of our, in my case, a county, and I can only assume our fellow counties and city input on the staff, you know, I know our Washington County staff's satisfied with the changes, and that's how the process should work, you know. So just want to compliment everyone.
Thanks for that, Commissioner. Member Jenkins.
So in the notes and in a discussion we had in our group on Monday, there was concern about the project losing visibility. We had discussed in our Monday non-electeds meeting, whatever we call it, that would it be possible to get a report on administratively approved extensions or exceptions, I should say, to the policy, so those projects don't lose visibility and don't lose focus.
You're looking at Joe and he's looking at Elaine.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll turn our
attention. Okay, I'll go to Elaine.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we do document all the changes that come through, both administratively, informally, and then these would also be, we do keep track of those, so we could provide a report on that.
Or are those accessible where you don't need to generate a report? We could just, is there a?
Well, we have them in electronic files, so we.
Okay, but not on the website.
But we could.
I think we could provide that
we could
periodically.
provide that.
I think it'd be more effective than just giving a link.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add a note, the cost changes that are minor are for any small elements removed. If a major change was made on a project, but there was no cost change, those would still come through the approval process. So if it was a bike lane that was separated and became on-street, that's a formal scope change. It would still be a formal scope change and it would come through, even though there's no cost change to that. So it will not stop those from still coming forward.
It's a good comment, yep.
I want to thank Commissioner Karwoski for his comment too. There was a lot of good work done here. So any further discussion on this matter? Is there a motion to adopt the recommended motion that the Transportation Advisory Board approve the updated scope change policy embodied in 2024-40?
So moved. More.
Second?
Petrick.
Very good. We got a motion and a second on 2024-40 in its recommended form. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of 2024-40 in this recommended form, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We have that
Carried.
in a second.
2024-40 is adopted in its recommended form. And then we are on to the last action item here, which is the scope change and program year policy request. And I'll go back to Chair McPherson for this one. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, staff did a really nice job of bullet pointing this for me just to hit the high points in here. So the current policy allows for one request for a one-year extension, but we know in recent years, we've seen more of those requests where project funds get coupled with other project funds, and you get these massive projects that have, similar to Anoka County, we've got a couple projects that have 13 to 14 funding mechanisms in there. So you're kind of like a puppeteer trying to work through all these things. But with that, inherently, that's going to cause some issues with the funding that you secure along the way. So TAB has been receiving and approving requests for exemptions or exceptions related to projects connected to other projects, and have asked the technical committees to update the policy and parameters. In this policy update, they added an exception for extraordinary circumstances such as project connection to another project. As I mentioned, when you look at a corridor like Trunk Highway 65 in Anoka, as we were strategizing how we're going to put our funding program together, you start intersection by intersection. A lot of times we start with regional solicitation dollars and it grows from there. Money begets money on a lot of these larger projects. So as you do that, and you do that at different years, inevitably you're going to have to ask for extensions or moving that money around. So with that being said, project sponsor must provide a justification for an exception. And so there was a scoring sheet included in the old policy that's been updated to reflect a little bit more onus on the project sponsor to provide a little more detail and description as to why they're requesting that exception, why they're requesting potentially a multi-year adjustment, or maybe it's a consecutive, and we'll get to that in 1 minute. But there's some thought that went into that. So they have to provide a little bit more thorough justification for their exception. Project sponsors can request more than one extension or more than 1 year. Any request beyond the second request. So in other words, what that means is you'd be allowed to make 2 requests, but if you're going to actually push it one more time, a third time, it's going to need to be reviewed and recommended by the TAB exec, and then it's going to go back to the technical committees for further evaluation and consideration, then a recommendation to TAB on what the status is with that. So again, this would allow more than one request, but once you do a third one or more, it's going to have to go through that additional process. And again, just to kind of really vet it out. We know that there's projects hanging out there right now that have funding tied to them, and unfortunately, for one reason or another, they're sitting there waiting, whether it's an environmental issue, a permitting issue, change of direction, that type of thing. So if you look at the revised language on the action item on page 1 here, this is how it's written in there. Exemptions to these limitations can be made due to extraordinary circumstances. For example, a circumstance related to a project's connection to another project or delays related to a more stringent environmental review. In these cases, the project sponsor must provide justification for the exception. Any request beyond that second will need to be reviewed and recommended by the TAB Executive Committee before consideration by TAC funding and programming. Any questions on that? That's really the meat and potatoes of this one. Also, when you look at the dates, when processing one of these, those dates were also adjusted as well. They went from April to June, providing a little more time for some of this being put together, project development. But that's really the high points without getting too far in the weeds. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you or anyone that has questions.
Yeah, I think, we've got circumstances established under which you can request an extension. I think we've used this language in years gone by, this extraordinary circumstances standard, because we wanted to have some flexibility with respect to each particular factual situation that might arise in terms of a need for a request of a program year extension. So I like the use of that standard of extraordinary circumstances, continued use of that. And then we've got a fixed period in which you can ask for that extension. And then if there's a second request, that has to then be reviewed and recommended by the TAB Exec Committee, I think. And so I think the point we're getting to is there has to be, there can come a time when a project just isn't going to be viable or deemed to be viable by the TAB, and we want those funds that were allocated to come back to the TAB for reallocation. So again, I think a nice piece of work here on something that is a little bit tricky to work on and establishes some parameters for how we handle these program year extension requests. And so we thank you for that, and we thank staff for that. Yes, Member Crimmins.
Mr. Chair, maybe I didn't hear it correctly, but it says here, any request beyond a second request. So that would be the third request.
Yeah.
Not the second.
Excuse me, beyond the
Oh,
second
okay.
request. Yep, thanks for that clarification. Okay. Member Martinson.
Thank you, Chair. So since it wasn't discussed, but it did come up at the informational meeting on Tuesday under the process and rules. There's a paragraph that says that these requests will be presented to the TAB for action on its consent agenda at the chair's discretion. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that that was the proposal, that it's not going to come to TAB for discussion as an action item. It's going to, by the chair's discretion, will be, so I presume then that by default, such requests are going to be on the consent agenda and not presented to us as discussion items per se, unless someone objects to it, I guess, because I guess we have that power on the TAB to object, to say we want to remove something from the consent agenda.
Correct.
I just wanted to draw people's attention to that to make sure that they saw that.
May I add a comment? That was in the existing policy, and we didn't even realize it was there. And we've just been putting it on the, as
This is why we
non-consent.
revisit our policies from time to time.
So that is an option of, we may continue to leave them on non-consent or, and that way we put at the chair's discretion was the new wording that we added in because we had been putting them on non-consent.
Yeah, well, I think we should continue the practice, frankly. It makes it a little bit easier of legal and non-consent. Yeah, Member Martinson, follow on.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually a separate issue that I wanted to draw attention to that I think staff has made some nice improvements as well to how the process of evaluating such requests go. Recall that we used to have sort of a point-based system where you'd get like 0 to 7 points for each of a set of criteria that were, quite frankly, fairly arbitrary and so not real great. And those have been replaced with a set of more narrative responses that the applicant will be asked to kind of give. And I think that kind of narrative is often what we are looking for here at TAB when we're trying to understand, is this something we want to approve or not, as opposed to just, well, it got a score of 5, but we're going to approve it anyway. We had one of those today. And so I think this is a nice improvement, and I just wanted to recognize staff for making that change, because I think it's a step in a positive direction. So.
Yep, thanks for that. Okay, any other questions, comments? Is there a motion to adopt 2024-41 in its recommended form?
So moved, Jenkins.
Second?
Second.
Second, Martinson. All right, we got a motion and a second to adopt 2024-41 in its recommended form. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 2024-41 is adopted in its recommended form. Thank you. That completes our the action items, and we're going to turn now to informational portion of the agenda. And I thought it was interesting as I listened to the reports come out of the various agencies. At top of mind is this a change in leadership on the federal level, and the view of the world that that leadership has, and the potential effect on all forms of activity that involve interaction with the federal government or funding by the federal government. And that also happened in the policymaker conversation, that we started having a conversation about at the federal level in terms of the diminishment of some concepts that all of us involved in government think are pretty important, that celebration of diversity, the recognition of equitable treatment and inclusion. And
climate change.
so we had we had quite a conversation about values versus finances, how we go about doing this work that we've been thinking of. And, it's in the past, it's been mode-based, the regional solicitation evaluation. We started looking at those transportation policy plan goals for 2050, equity and inclusive, equitable and inclusive, health and safe, dynamic and resilient, climate change, natural systems. And what we've evolved to is this sort of hybrid model of saying, okay, maybe we should look at, and this, I think it came primarily out of the workshop that many of us were involved in January, and we reduced it down to some principal categories in those TPP goals. Thought we could take some of those TPP goals, align a couple of them together, like climate change and natural systems. Maybe equity and inclusiveness becomes a part of the scoring mechanism, but not necessarily a standalone category. And looked at definite standalone categories in terms of health and safety and dynamism and resiliency. And so with that information at hand from the broad policymaker working group session, the work session took place in January, plus subsequent work by a couple of advisory boards, we've come up with this hybrid structure as a possibility. Where it's a combination of the goals and the mode. And so today we talked about, as we got past the federal discussion and the implications of potential changes in federal law and emphasis, the three primary categories of safety, dynamic, and environment. And then under the safety, we'd have proactive safety and reactive safety. Under dynamic would be bike ped, transit, roadway, subsumed in roadway, we assume will be bridges, and then environment standing as its own category. And so we had conversations around that. While our region is equitable and inclusive, we discussed those, as I said, as scoring measures. And our staff and the TAC were looking for direction, because what we want to make sure that we do is whatever methodology we recommend to the full tab out of this working group, that it doesn't enhance the work of our technical people. It diminishes that work and makes things more efficient and effective and more simplified. And several of the members of our policymaker work group emphasized that repeatedly. So we are now at a point where we have said that you can keep moving forward with this proposed modal hybrid structure, using those goals as the primary drivers, and then subsumed in those goals would be some of the modal operations, and then figure out what we're going to have for the primary emphasis in those different categories, like bike ped, for example, and then think about how we would score it, send it back down to the technical people, and see if this makes sense to them, and if they could, because they got concerned about, what would the scoring matrix look like? Well, in one sense, if you use bike ped as an example, if the goal were enhance the regional transportation bike network, it's a pretty simple measurement. I mean, does it or does it not, your proposed project enhance that RBTN? But there are other factors that are more complicated, like connecting communities, and that require some thought in terms of what that scoring matrix might look like. And of course, it'll come back to policymakers to decide the weighting on those scoring factors, which we think are more important in terms of those factors that we present to you for possible consideration, including the subcategories in those particular categories of roadway, transit, and bike ped. So we had about a 2-hour conversation this morning, and that's a short summary of it. I don't know if any of my colleagues on the committee would want to comment further, but it was a really content-rich conversation, as I mentioned earlier. Commissioner?
I just want to say one of the biggest things we came out with is that we need flexibility. We need flexibility to be able to react to what's maybe coming down from the federal. And we're not very far into the administration, and there's still a lot more action that could come. And so I think that's a really good flavor for us to think about. how much would we allow so that we could have flexibility to move quickly and agile if we needed to collect dollars.
Okay. All right, I'm going to turn now to Member Johnson to give an update on the active transportation work. And you might even comment about what the TAC had said about active transportation, what they were wrestling with from the role of active transportation in the regional solicitation.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hovland. Again, I emailed Elaine and I was like, the only thing will be recruiting new people for the active transportation work group. And turns out that was minimizing how much we had to talk about. So I'll be quick. First of all, if you are interested in being on the active transportation work group, we're certainly looking for more members. Again, it's one of these issues that we've been going a year. So happy anniversary to everybody who's been on that. Thank you to staff. Joe Whiting's been doing amazing work, getting things posted really quickly. We're not quite done yet. So one thing that was highlighted this morning is that across the categories, the bike ped one is probably going to be the most complex because we have a totally separate funding source with completely different rules. And I'm looking at Commissioner Holberg, who has them memorized and ready to go. And it's a very valuable skill to have on that work group. So thank you. But these things have to interact and we have to think about how those are going to be working together. So making those recommendations back to TAB is really important. It's just there's a lot of specific stuff we have to think through in that particular category. So we're planning on meeting in March and then bring back at least some thoughts at that point. If it's full recommendations, we'll bring those to you, but more than likely info items. And then I think the other piece, just as I mentioned, as Chair Hovland was bringing it up, is that because these are different funding sources and we have different rules, and we just had this whole conversation about what's going to happen with federal funding. The only thing that can really impact these funds is the state legislature and the governor signs off on some change to this. And so we saw in an email from Elaine yesterday, it could be the funding amount, it could be a change in requirements, yet to be determined. But fundamentally, these dollars are different. So we can think about them differently and they have more flexibility, makes our lives more complex, but to give us a lot of opportunity on how to think about those things. So I'll leave it at that, but I'm open for any questions that may have been brought up.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, I'll volunteer to be added to the, what is it?
Active transportation. Good.
Active transportation
Thank you.
work group.
Thank you.
Want to include me on the meetings and.
I opened my mouth and accidentally volunteered this morning.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if we're doing
Yes.
this formally, but we've spoken to, and I would be glad to help support.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions for Chair Johnson or his capable vice chair sitting over here? All right. Okay, good. So those are the updates from both the policymaker work group and the active transportation work group. Staff's going to go back to work now. If I jump back to the policymaker work group notion, I think Steve's back there. Yeah, there's Steve. What do our next meeting is May?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, May is the meeting. We are planning to come to this group for a longer presentation in April. And
all right, that's good. I like the timing of that.
Yep.
Yeah, bring
I
them
thought
more.
your summary was
More thorough update than what I'm giving them.
No, you did. You gave a great summary, and I just wonder if we should even send out some of the materials to the rest of the tab.
I think that's a great idea. I thought about that, and I was going to mention that to Elaine, that this last PowerPoint that you put together should go out to all the tab members so that they have a chance to look at that in advance of the presentation in April. That will help them get up to speed on what we've been talking about. Okay, good thought on your
Chair
part.
Hovland, just,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's relevant to both of ours. I think it came up this morning. Commissioner Ulrich mentioned, kind of TAB not knowing about the activities that are happening in the work groups. And so I don't think maybe it's to Elaine to send out the link to the website that has literally every single meeting with all the minutes included, just to know what each group is working on for the policymaker work group and the active transportation sales tax.
Okay. So just for a little add-on to Chair Johnson, what the TAC talked about was this active transportation funding. Should it be subsumed into the regional solicitation or be out there on a standalone basis? And I think Chair Johnson did a good job of expressing the source of those funds and the notion that, at least from that working group, it should continue down its own pathway, be its own separate source of funding and not be subsumed into the regional solicitation. The only other thing I was thinking about federal government-wise was I was in a meeting of mayors a couple weeks ago, and we had Tom Fisher there from the University of Minnesota making a presentation. And I don't know if anybody here is associated with the university. We said the federal government had cut their research dollars, even though they were contracted to provide the funds, those funds by 70%. That if you wanted to continue to do this research, you got 30% of the money we said we'd give you to work with. So I don't know what the nature of those relationships are from a legal standpoint, but it was quite a dramatic thing, since I think one of the significant sources of revenue that support research that's important to be done, and professors doing it, are those federal research dollars. Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do know a bit about that from my private sector work. As some of you know, I work in the med tech field. And so, yeah, there was a blatant cut in what is called indirect costs. What is misleading about something like indirect costs, it sounds like just these administrative costs, that it's, just things to hype up things. But the NIH grant program was actually structured so all of the money wouldn't be directed just towards high-profile doctors or single researchers couldn't get a chunk of money, so they intentionally split things out into direct and indirect costs. So the primary investigators, yes, got some money from the grant, but the people actually doing the lab work, doing all the work, are the ones that are now being cut. So I can tell you that the impact of what is happening at HHS, we'll talk about, transportation is a whole nother world, but basically my client base is, my job right now is moving companies out of the country. That's what's happening. That is what's happening in the med tech industry right now. So, and because of some of the things at the U.
So we've got a little bit of time here for an expansion on this kind of conversation. If anybody else has had some experiences they want to share.
I on the HHS side, we looked at the governor's budget. That's pretty impactful to counties, and all my county fellow folks around here, around the table, they want to have us share in the wealth with the Medicaid, and that would be several percentage points on our property levies for all of us, really. So that's a really big one. One of the other things is some of the grant dollars that have come down from the feds are around food security, and there are several grants that are not coming through for some of our food shelves in the greater metro area. So we're aware of those. We're trying to contact everybody and find out where people are at, or if they've called or found out if they're going to get it, but it has been on hold for that.
Member Martinson.
Since you opened the door, I will, thank you, Chair. So having worked my entire professional research career on NIH funding, I received my PhD with funding from the National Institutes of Health. I did postdoctoral work with funding from the National Institutes of Health, and I spent my entire research career writing grants to the NIH, to the National Science Foundation, and to the Veterans Affairs. And all of that work I did in entities that depended upon those indirect cost recoveries in order to, so the University of Minnesota used to have a negotiated rate, and it's negotiated with the Fed every 3 years, and it was roughly 55%. So for every dollar that I would bring in that I got to do my research, my employer would get 55 cents in order to have the building, have the lights on, have the staff who could do the statistics, have the staff who could manage the finances, have students and graduate students who could be labor to do the work on the projects that needed to get done. The university can't function without those indirects, and capping them at the 10% or the 15% level that's proposed, first of all, it's a usurpation of previously allocated dollars that is under Congress's control to allocate. So the executive has completely overstepped their bounds, and Congress isn't seemingly doing anything to correct it. But it will destroy the university. It will do great damage to Mayo Clinic. It will damage other entities around. I personally know 135 people at Health Partners Institute who will almost certainly all go unemployed, because that institute won't exist if they can't be collecting the indirect rates at the level that they were. And they're not the only one. I'm just saying this is going to be horrendous for Minnesota's economy, straight up.
I was on a call, it was a virtual call a couple of weeks ago with respect to the impact of loss of federal funding on cities. And we spent just about the whole time talking about that potential financial impact, and cities were giving examples from around the country. But there was no discussion until the very end when the issue was raised about the abandonment, diminishment, however you want to call it, and I hate to even use the acronym DEI, because I think the words that make up that acronym are really important to be thinking about. And so we started having that conversation. That's going to continue this weekend. But even in my own community, 2 weeks ago, the Edina Asian American Alliance kids had a Lunar New Year celebration at the high school on a Saturday afternoon. And my wife and I went over there, and it was important to go over there for a lot of reasons, but I thought the kids might be nervous about what's happening with at the national level and how it might affect them, because they're kids of color, and they're Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, Thai Americans, they're from all over the world. Their parents, Indian Americans. And when I got there, the kids were, you could tell me they were a little bit anxious, but the parents were really, you could see they've really been affected by this. So we ended up having a good conversation about it. And then afterwards, it was about 5:30, we thought, well, we were kind of hungry, so we went down to this new pizza place in Edina, and we were going to, have a pizza, and of course it was an hour-long wait, so we just ordered a pizza and we thought, well, we'll stand at the bar and have a drink, and then some people came in that we knew, and so they said, well, what have you been doing? And so I talked about going over to talk to the kids about how important community was and how they were an important part of community, and their parents too. And I'm kind of attenuating those comments, but it was important to talk to people about it and how important they were to the fabric of our community. And I felt this tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, this guy said, I heard, hey, my name's Mike, I live in Edina, middle-aged guy, and he says, I heard you talking about DEI. He said, what were you saying about DEI? And I said, well, I was telling him about the event over at the high school and the kids over there that wanted to make sure that they still felt like they belonged and they were part of the United States just like everybody else, part of our community. He said, well, you got it all wrong. I said, well, what do you mean, Mike? He said, well, it's not about that at all. It's about merit. And so I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I got 2 granddaughters that are half Asian, and they're not going to be able to get into the kind of school they want to get into because there's a quota on Asians. Mm-hmm. I said, well, how do you know that? How old are they? He said, well, they're in grade school. I said, well, and so we had this whole conversation, but the notion is that he had conflated this notion of college admission with DEI. Mm-hmm. And what those words stand for, this notion that we should be celebrating this ever-increasing diversity that we're part of, that this treatment of people is really critical, how you treat each other, and this idea of inclusion. But he had, everything got to be on merit, everything got to be on merit. And so I don't know what other people's observations are on this issue so far, but it would be interested in hearing some of your observations that you're hearing from people in your community.
I'm going to just speak up a little bit. My daughter was able to do her cancer research and get her PhD in biomedical engineering from Dartmouth thanks to the NIH.
Yeah.
Would not have happened.
Yeah. So we got some interesting times ahead of us in a lot of different ways. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for creating this space and for this.
Could you pull that microphone over, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for creating the space for us to just actually share and talk to. I represent a very diverse community on the east side of St. Paul, and we are hearing from our local community business associations who are reporting that, small businesses are already struggling. Yeah. They can't find workers to come in because they're afraid. And on top of that, they're seeing revenue decreases of 50%. We don't know how long these businesses are going to last. These small mom and pop shop, as well as these businesses that contribute to the vibrancy of our cultural corridors and communities.
Okay, yes, thanks for that. Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so people understand how real some of this is, so my husband is Native American, so my kids are Native American. My husband, they've been advised to travel with identification that shows that they are Americans.
Yeah.
That they have to travel with either tribal IDs, the degree of Indian blood, these types of things. That is happening now. It's never a conversation I ever thought I'd have to have with my kids. That is what's happening right now.
Mr. Chair, you know, in conversations with some of my CFO and everything, we've been talking about the large number of layoffs that are coming out actually across the country. And the inflation numbers are still looking pretty bad. And it's likely we'll be seeing that reaction into a recession. So this is going to create us some, you're seeing small businesses and everything like this. Yeah, you can't get, down in Florida here, they can't get people to pick the limes and lemons and the oranges. They won't go out. They're afraid to, and some of them are leaving and going back home. So.
Oh, okay. Member Bradley,
And along those lines.
you can maybe have the last word.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Several of my friends work for the CDC and for the federal government, and they have been saying that they've been laying off and firing the wrong people, and then they don't have a way to get in touch with those people to contact them to come back. And so we're going to see a whole lot of things, especially since we now have a new director in charge of HHS and other things that it will impact research and health and everything in the future.
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, member.
All right, thank you, Chair. I can speak from my anecdotal experience in my current private sector job as a transportation consultant that it's very much a cat and mouse game with all the grant applications to change all the grant narratives in order to follow the new administration grant guidelines and criterias. Myself and many of my colleagues in the transportation field have been up to midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., just to read pages and pages of the grant applications, often a day or two, just before the deadline, to just try to help the communities get the funding they need for much needed infrastructure improvement that they otherwise would not get. So.
Thank you. Okay, folks, it's, yeah. Anybody got anything to liven us up a little bit or send us out with a little hope?
Girls hockey tournament starts this week. I hear Edina girls are in the.
Oh, yeah.
State girls hockey tournament.
Yeah, Minnetonka's
That
out.
should brighten you up.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, that should help.
If we wanted diversity,
Foster.
equity, inclusion, we would make Edina a little less competitive.
I just have an agenda question. There's the Regional Transportation and Climate Change Multimodal Measure Study.
Yeah. So the last item on the information section is we're not obviously not talking about that because the person is sick that was going to make the presentation.
Oh, okay.
I should have told you that at the beginning.
There we go. There you go. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Member Foster, for having me do my job.
I know, back there, like.
All right, we stand adjourned. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thank you.